Hi, this is Herb Shapiro with the Dr. of X channel, and today is part of our series about creating objects to 3D print. In this case, I have a cookie cutter. I'm going to talk about a tool for creating two-dimensional objects in the SVG file format. SVG is a file format that is easily imported into a number of computer-aided design or CAD programs that you can use to create three-dimensional objects. So stay tuned and let's learn something together. Let's jump right in today, and I'm going to go to the very end. I'm going to talk to you about the result of what we're going to do before I show you how to do it. So one of the easiest to use computer-aided design programs available is called Tinkercad. And Tinkercad is very, very good at manipulating objects. I'll link some tutorials here. But basically you stack three-dimensional objects, cubes and cylinders and pyramids together to create objects. You can define an object as a solid or a hole. If it's a hole, when you stack it together, it makes a cut into an object. But Tinkercad's drawing capabilities, the ability to draw something from scratch, not a predefined object, are very, very limited. There's an easy way to extend those capabilities, and that's to use SVG, Scaled Vector Graphic Files. But you need a way to create those. Let me start by showing you a demonstration of what you can do with an SVG file. So I'm going to go in Tinkercad to import. I'm going to import a Dino SVG file, and we're going to say just import the art, not the artboard. The artboard we'll see in a minute is our view box, but just import the art. And you'll see that Tinkercad went ahead and imported our SVG file and automatically extruded it. So we went from a two-dimensional object to a three-dimensional object that has a height. Now, because there are a variety of ways to create SVG files, we can pretty much now draw anything and use it as an object in Tinkercad. So let's take a step back now to the beginning and talk about SVG files. There are two basic types of graphic files that we use on computers. Files where the representation of our graphic is a series of lines and segments and points drawn in a Cartesian XY grid in order to create our object. On the left-hand side, you'll see a picture of a house drawn with 6 line segments, or this could be one path because it could be a continuous line segment. On the right-hand side, you'll see that same house drawn with a series of dots. Now, when you draw with dots, it's called a bitmap. And when you go to print or represent that drawing, you print at a particular number of dots per inch. So you might print at 150 dots per inch. You might output something at 200, 300, or even 1200 dots per inch. That's in a bitmap. In a vector format, you represent things with XY geometry. Perhaps in order to draw a line segment, the first end is at 25, 25, the second end is at 125, and you've drawn a line. So that's the difference fundamentally between vector graphics and bitmap graphics. CAD programs, computer-aided design programs, generally work with vector graphics. Now, there are some programs like Matter Control that will import a bitmap and convert it to a vector representation. But in general, computer-aided design programs, Tinkercad's a good example, have the ability to import vector graphics, but not bitmaps. In order to exchange these vector graphics between programs or represent them on the internet as a picture on a website, you need a standardized format. The standardized format that's used on the web for most vector graphics is called SVG. And we'll see here the definition from Wikipedia. It's an extendable markup language, XML, vector image format for two-dimensional graphics. Let me translate that into English. It's a file format where if you take and you bring up the file in a regular text editor, you can see what's inside. So in that case, it's like G code or HTML. And it's in a standardized format. XML is a standardized format, so you can exchange it between programs. Now on this slide, let's look at a representation of what you would write in this file. So if you wanted to create a rectangle, you might say, I want a rectangle, RECT, starting at X of 25, Y of 25, with a width of 200 and a height of 200. Circle, you have a starting position, you have a radius, maybe you have a fill or a stroke. Polyline are a series of pairs of points where you draw lines between them. So SVG is a very readable format, but there's slight variations in this format. And Tinkercad, that we showed you at the beginning, is a little fussy about importing it. So how do you create these documents? Well, you create them with a program. You could use Illustrator as an example from Adobe. That's a program that sells for hundreds of dollars. You could use Inkscape, completely free. These are very sophisticated drawing programs, specifically for drawing illustrations, things that you're going to print on perhaps a color inkjet printer, or you're going to represent as pictures on the web. But the types of things we often want to produce for our three-dimensional objects start with very simple drawings. And so there's a wonderful program that sells for all of $10. It's available on all of the standard operating systems called Boxy SVG. And that's what I'm going to demonstrate today. But before we go to the program, we have to define one more concept. And that's the concept of the canvas, or the area that we're going to draw on. The canvas in an SVG file is infinite. It can be as large as you want. The canvas you've defined for your drawing is called a viewport. And the section of your drawing that you want to display at any given moment on, let's say, on a website is called the view box. Now, the view box is used by most programs, Tinkercad is a good example, as the area to import. How do you find Boxy SVG? Well, you just go to the Boxy SVG website, and if you go all the way to the bottom, you'll see how to obtain the program for various operating systems. Now, the variant called Web App is expensive. It's $10 a month instead of a flat fee of $10. And the reason is they're giving you storage in the cloud for all of your drawings. But it is available on all the standard operating systems for a flat fee of $10 from those operating system stores. So I've tried this on both a Mac and on a PC, and in fact on a Chromebook. It works great and fundamentally the same on all operating systems. Now, there are a set of tutorials on the website. I recommend you look at those. But today we're going to give you the basic ideas behind Boxy SVG. So let's jump into the application. Here we can see the Boxy SVG main screen. There are a set of menu items across the top, and you can do all of the functions that I'm going to describe with these menu options. However, you can also do them by clicking on icons. On the left-hand side, you'll see all of your basic objects that you can draw and manipulators for those objects. So this first one is called Transform. It's also Select. The next one's called Edit, then Pan. On the right-hand side, you'll see characteristics of an object. So this first one is Fill. This is the color I want to fill the currently selected object. Next one, as an example, is Stroke. That's the color I want to stroke or outline the object. The next one is for combining objects and images together and applying filters to them. There's one for topography. There's one for geometry. This is how you see the current size of your object. However, if you go over here to the top and you click on SVG to look at the overall SVG instead of the object, you'll see any view boxes that are defined. So we have a view box of 500 by 500, and the overall view port is, at this point, infinite. It's not subsetted down. SVG files, for when they're used on the internet, on the web, can have metadata in them. Not important for us. We can further manipulate our shapes. We can arrange our shapes. This will show you all of the objects on the screen. Right now we have one. Let's go ahead and add a second one. And now you'll see we have two. You have the ability to predefine a series of symbols, colors, shapes you're going to use, types. There's a library here of standard images and vectors and types and colors that you can use. Generators are little mini programs that are used to add more complex objects to your diagram. As an example, you could add a barcode or a QR code or various types of charts. And then most importantly for us, you can export these as standard SVGs, and these SVGs import into Tinkercad perfectly, or you can export in a variety of other formats if you're using this for a different purpose. If you select responsive, then there will be no subsetting of your canvas. It will be virtual. If you select fixed, it will fix the canvas size. And in our case, once again, that really doesn't matter because we're using this with a computer-aided design program. And then you have a full history of everything you did, and you can delete items in your history or clear them. Now, let's go and look for a second at the bottom. Now, you'll see at the bottom, we have the types of commands that we originally saw in our example on Wikipedia. So what's really interesting about this is I can go here and edit this text and look at the green line on the screen. I'm going to change that to 2, and it becomes 2 smaller here. So I can edit the SVG live. That will also be reflected in the menus. So you can draw, in essence, with the predefined shapes. You can set characteristics with the panels on the right, but you can also modify it down below if you're interested in either learning SVG in detail or just creating additional types of objects. Now, when you go to a particular object, if you click on it once, you select it, you click on it a second time, and you'll see options for that object. So I can, as an example, make my corners of this square or rectangle rounded. Now I left click, drag to define the object. If I left click again, the object has been locked in place. My particular object will stay selected until I click on the transform tool. Once I've selected an object, I can change the color. I can change the stroke, and down below I can vary the characteristics of that stroke. Those characteristics are going to be very, very important when we go to import this into a CAD program. And I'm going to have a separate video on specifically using Boxy SVG with Tinkercad. Now, in addition to predefined objects, you can draw lines. If I click on the quad Bezier and I left click once, go to a second point, left click again, I've drawn a line. I can continue left clicking, continue that line. And then I can double click or hit the escape key in order to exit. If I click my object, I then have the characteristics to change the detailed characteristics of that object, including leaving it a line by setting the fill to none. That's what this slash means here. Now, in addition, if I click left click once and drag and then left click and hold, I can move up and down to draw curves. Now once I'm in curve mode, if I want to go back to straight mode, I hold down the Shift key. And we're going to hit Escape now to get out of that. The second cubic bezier gives you additional control, more fine control, because it has two handles on your curves instead of one. In practical use, I haven't seen a great difference. You can draw arcs pretty much the same way. Hit the Escape key to get out of that. You can draw freehand. And you can use, they call it a blob. I find this works basically like a marker. Okay. You have the ability to add text to your diagram. And when you go to the text typography palette over here, you can change the face. These are all Google fonts that you can apply. You can take and click on text path and then draw a path. And then when you hit Escape to get out of that, if you double click on that, you can go back and whatever you type, will stay on that line. We can click on Transform to then select that. Now, once you have an item selected, let's actually select this all and erase it. And we'll put a simple item back on our screen. Once you have an item selected, you can click on this second pointer, the Edit pointer, and then you can change the individual points on that object. In the case of this rectangle, we can change the radius. After we draw a curve, let's draw a curved line here. Click once, drag, click and hold. Hit Escape because we're all done. Now if I click on the Edit button, I can take and I can click on any of these points and manipulate, these little handles to change that curve. I can also directly drag on the curve and manipulate it. So you'll see Boxy SVG is a very, very powerful program. It's very easy to use. Now this is what's really interesting. Let's say I have this particular rectangle, and let's go to geometry and see what sizes it is. This is 275 by, so let's make this, I'm going to double click here and make it 100 by 45. Now I'm going to click down here to view, and I'm going to take and make this view box much closer. Let me double click on that to make that go away, to the size of our object. So now I have a view box that's 177 by 121, reasonable size, and I have an object that's 100 by 45. Let's go ahead and export that. And we're going to export that as a rounded rectangle. I already had one. We'll save that. Let's go back to Tinkercad now. Let's zoom out a little bit so we can see more of our work plane. We'll choose a file, rounded rectangle, open. And we're going to look at just the rectangle, bring that in. And you can see here now that Tinkercad has taken our rounded rectangle and imported it as a three-dimensional object. So, folks, I hope this was useful for you. Boxy SVG is a very powerful program. It's only $10. I think it's a wonderful part of your arsenal. You can use SVG files with not only Tinkercad, but with other CAD programs. I find some of the other CAD programs, it's more complex to manipulate SVG than Tinkercad. So I like doing this with Tinkercad. Stay tuned, come back to the channel and look for an extensive video on ways you can manipulate SVGs so they do what you're expecting with Tinkercad. As an example, what if I wanted to import just the outline of this box and not a filled box? Well, in this future video, I'll show you all of these tricks about using strokes and paths and objects with Tinkercad. If this was helpful, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell. Have a great day, and let's continue to learn things together.